Okay, let's return now to our top story, that contentious NATO summit that's got underway on Wednesday in Brussels. That's when Donald Trump has demanded more money from the US allies, and he's launched a very public attack on Germany, calling it being controlled by Russia. Well, Oliver McGee is a science and technology policy advisor for the National Diversity Coalition for Donald Trump, and he's joining us now on Skype from Lubbock in Texas. We appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Do you think that setting unrealistic targets and criticizing member nations of NATO is really the way to persuade people to increase their defense spending?
Well, Rob, thank you for having me tonight. This is really about the guns and the money, but really fair guns and fair money, fair trade with dealing with the money and across these nations and partnerships economically. But also, he's asking for about 2 to 4% increase in protecting and building the guns by 2024. So he's really saying and tying his foreign policy to his domestic policy, which is really about America first. We're changing from where we were post-World War II, where that was more of a relational foreign policy amongst the NATO nations, to now in the age of Trump, we're looking at more of a transactional foreign policy. Because the world is changed in this time, Rob. It's really about fast capital, fast technology, and fast growth. So we've had to really look into how we do foreign policy through fast transactions rather than longer-term diplomatic relations. He's still trying to preserve diplomacy, but he's really trying to say that that diplomacy is going to be tied to how we do fair practices in trade, but also equitable defense spending. No longer can the United States spend 4% of its GDP, and other countries are spending less than 2% of their GDP. So he's really trying to get some equity across the board on that.
Having said that, there is a certain sense that demanding that certain countries go either up to 2% or in excess of 2% gives the impression to those of us looking from the outside that the president isn't really aware of the economic situations within each of those countries, and painting a broad brush approach to the defense spending across the board in NATO is actually showing, dare I say it, some degree of lack of understanding about the way that the world economy works, given the fact that he is so dependent and so determined, rather, to maintain trade links and the economics of all of this.
Well, Donald Trump is doing right now, foreign policy-wise, Rob, what he really campaigned on, which was really saying that he always felt that it's time for America to get tough. He also thought that America wasn't really getting a good, fair deal across the board, particularly on trade, but also on the military spending, particularly across the NATO nations. So the American people are backing him on this. They're really saying, we're not really interested in really trying to break the backs of our international partners economically, because they're finding ways to use their money in other places. Particularly Germany is now taking its excess cash and looking at the gas and energy with Russia. So he's really trying to position himself for his next week talks with Putin, but at the same time, he's trying to talk to these nations coming off the Big Seven in Quebec and saying, you know, we're really about trying to get equitable trade. This is about the China games with regards to what they're doing with trade. And also, he's going to be speaking very candidly with Russia and Putin about what they're doing in trade as well. He's really looking at the trade ledger in the United States and saying, boy, I got to get some equity across to this. And then when you looked at when you look at the guns ledger, he's found 5 out of 29 nations weren't really necessarily adding to NATO as well.
Forgive me for interrupting, but you did raise an interesting point. I mean, Donald Trump made the allegation that Germany was taking between about 50 and 75% of its gas from Russia. And to some extent, according to EU figures that I've seen, yes, that is correct. The misunderstanding, it may well be, is that although it is taking that amount of gas from Russia, that only makes up about 20% of the energy that Germany actually uses. So to some extent, that is misleading, isn't it? Yes, it's taking up to about 75% of its gas from Russia, but that only makes up a smaller proportion of the amount of energy that Germany is actually using on a daily basis. It's that kind of, shall we say, misinterpretation of a situation that does lead people to be very skeptical when they come to believing Donald Trump.
Well, I think you used the right word, Rob, misunderstandings and misinterpretations, because really when you're dealing with transactional foreign policy, it's really about how you do the dealings in the small. Negotiations are all about in the small. Relational foreign policies, what we see post-World War II, are broad strokes, a Marshall Plan, how we really shape foreign policy for long-term periods, 10s and 20 years. Right now, we're trying to deal with how we're going to deal with the next 5 years, how we're going to deal with the next 2 years or the 3 years because of the fast nature of the capital that takes place, Rob. And then what you're trying to do is to try to look at how you're going to use the faster technology to be able to build those guns and the monies, and then at the same time, try to get rapid growth because everybody's in the growth game in this country right now, and it's growing really fast. The United States is trying to get to a plus 4% growth model. China's already at a 6% growth model. And the NATO nations are trying to get growing fast as well because they're all using the same capital and this is all about how you do with the currencies across the currency market.
Right,
and that's all in the small.
Again, forgive me for interrupting you. I do take your point. Of course, America first is the policy of the Trump administration. They make no secret of that. But the U.S. does, for better or worse, have to live alongside the rest of the world, and a significant part of that is defending itself. Now, NATO is a fundamental part of maintaining the security around the world. Isn't there a risk that by taking this aggressive stance towards his fellow NATO members that Donald Trump is actually putting the structure of NATO and therefore the defense capabilities of NATO at risk?
Well, he did sign the agreement in the summit, so that's not too aggressive as people might want to paint what he's doing. He is also being very aggressive with his rhetoric, and that is classic Trump. We've seen this for 2 years. I think media's probably right now getting used to it. But there is a genius behind what he's doing in the rhetoric. He's really saying to folks in Rust Belt America, folks in Florida, folks in the middle part of the country, who are really backing him 100%, that they want America to be a little bit more tougher on the stage. They like the hard rhetoric that Trump is making. And really, as I said in the beginning of our segment, Rob, he's really tying his foreign policy to America's domestic policy. And make no bones about it, other nations are doing the same thing. They're protecting their borders, they're protecting their stressed national incomes, but also they're trying to build their infrastructures. Those are the 3 I's of Donald Trump. And I think he's trying to spread that across other nations, saying, get on board with this because it's fast technology and fast growth.
Let me interrupt you again. I'm sorry, but time is against us. But very briefly, if you don't mind, as you rightly said, we are seeing a particular arc that follows a negotiation from Donald Trump. He goes in hard, he unsettles people in the hope that they're going to be unsettled enough to give them what he wants. Is there going to come a point, do you think, where world leaders, particularly around the globe, are going to look at this when it all starts? We've seen it in North Korea, we've seen it in the G7, now we're seeing it with NATO, that they're going to see this arc begin, and they're basically going to sit back and say, right, we'll just get this bombastic part over and done with, and then we'll actually start the negotiations. And that might actually undercut whatever leverage Donald Trump might have.
Well, he has leverage. The United States controls about 85% of the world's capital. So that's leverage going in the door. What he's saying is since we already have that leverage capital and it's moving faster, it's time for us to start really getting tough with the rhetoric as America so that he can then say, hey, we can basically carry the carrot and the stick. We will give the carrots, but we'll also shake a big stick. And it's also going back to what you've seen earlier times of Reaganism, all the way back to Roosevelt, in Teddy Roosevelt, in what he had done is, speak softly but carry a big stick. So the thing is that that's what he's really doing. He's sort of speaking loudly and carrying a big stick at the same time. But he's also tossing out some carrots.
Oliver McGee, thank you very much indeed for your time and for joining us in Al Jazeera.
Thank you, Rob.